Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
I even remember the date. It was Friday the 13th, 1991.
In September. I remember the date because me and a bunch of high school buddies were going to do a marathon of all them Jason movies that night. So I, came home from school as usual. And I went up to my room to
nick a bottle of wine from your drinks cabinet. And as we opened the door, I heard bang. So we went to investigate.
I opened up the door and there it was.
What would Ted Lasso do? That's the question we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple Dabalia.
And I'm Jeff Harry. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you discover your own Lasso way and embrace what it means to believe.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing excitingly well, actually, especially after seeing this episode 10, right?
Yeah. Episode 10, No Weddings and a Funeral. This one was written by Jane Becker and directed by MJ Delaney. And I think, I could be wrong, I'd have to go back and check, but I think this might have been the one that MJ Delaney actually won an award for.
Oh, wow.
I'll have to double check that. It was either a Golden Globe or an Emmy or something. So
it was so well written. And I just love the contrast, and we'll get into all of that. But I love that they talked about death, because I've been doing these death chats with a couple of friends of mine since the pandemic. I think we've done like 5 of them. They're like a few hours long, because we realize that people don't talk about death enough. Yeah. I don't think it's actually addressed enough. And I love that they actually sat in it and all of the awkwardness of death and funerals and the weirdness of all of it. I thought it was just great.
Yeah, I agree. Especially like in this country, I feel like we have no real ritual around death, right? Like you think about a lot of cultures. I know in my culture, the Hindu culture, you look at like Mexico with the Day of the Dead and like so many other places I know that really, celebrate the lives that people led and honor the ancestors. And even like, especially here, like with Native American communities, Indigenous communities, you see a lot of ritual around death, but it's just awkward here for most people. Like people don't want to talk about it. They don't know how to talk about it, especially in the workplace.
Yeah.
When my mom passed away, it was totally unexpected. And I was out of the office for like almost a month or maybe 5 weeks. And when I went back, this guy that I knew, he kind of stopped me in the hallway and he's like, well, you've been gone for a while. We haven't seen you around here. Must be nice to have so much vacation time or, or whatever. And I just, at that point, like I just didn't care anymore. And I looked at him and I said, well, my mom died. So yeah. And I just kind of walked away, but it was just one of those things where, people make a lot of assumptions or whatever, but also people in general just weren't equipped to know how to support me, right? And vice versa. Like I know in the past, like it's, that somebody has passed away or try to figure out how to be there for people, but we're just not taught to really do that.
Yeah, I feel especially in like a lot of Western culture, it's almost as if you want it to be fixed. You want that person to feel better. So you're like, what can I do to make you feel better so that this goes away? And it's just like, it's not going away. Like It's grief. Grief comes and goes like waves. I read this once on Reddit. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, let me support you right now. And then you're like, okay, the funeral's over. Okay, you're good now, right? In Filipino culture, something as, standard as like the casket, for example, they, in many times, have the casket out for sometimes a whole week, sometimes 2 weeks. It sits usually in someone's house and people come and visit the person over that period of time. So you actually get comfortable being around that person that just died, right? Or at least their body. I feel like, especially in America, we just want to get it out of the way as quickly as possible. We want to like quick wake, quick funeral, and then get it done, and let's move on with the rest of our lives. And I don't think that's healthy. I just don't think so. So I love that this actually talked about that, and we had to sit in the awkwardness of how everyone was coping, because everyone was coping in a different way.
Right, right. So, yeah, so for me, like some of the overarching themes of this one, definitely grief, right? Death and grief.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in that, like the messiness of grief and the messiness and complexity of relationships, especially with our parents. The other thing that really came up for me pretty strongly was this idea of letting people know they matter. And I know we've talked about this several times in the past, but just this idea of letting people know along the way that they matter and not waiting or not assuming that they already know or whatever, but just taking that moment to do so, you know?
Yeah, another theme that came up for me, which I did not expect, was there was a little bit of toxic positivity that I also felt showed up. I think of the music at the very or at the beginning, her mom playing, music to get her in a lighter mood, and then Ted was playing some music and being all happy, and Roy being like, "Well, I don't really care about death, and it's not that big of a deal," and trying to just pretend like it didn't bother him when it really did. I found that really interesting as well, where people were trying to almost hide the fact that it was a really weird situation and they didn't know how to feel. And rather than saying, I don't know how to feel, instead pretending they were a certain way.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd call it toxic positivity though, right? Like I think it is just exactly what you said, which is that people don't know how to be with it. And so there is the pretending piece of it for sure. We put on the mask to be like, yeah, I'm fine, it's no big deal. And we don't hear until later that, it is a big deal. So first of all, I feel like we're jumping all over, but the song that Ted is getting ready to is Easy Lover by Phil Collins. And a couple of episodes back, he made that comment about, a man should only take as long as the song Easy Lover to get dressed and get ready. And so it was a nice little callback to that. So it's what he listens to every day when he gets ready.
Oh, interesting.
In terms of her mom, though, Rebecca's mom, and the song that she was playing, the Rick Astley song, I think, like, for me, it just goes back to that thing about, like, what you were saying in terms of how people cope, right? And so for her, like, when she said, like, "Oh, well, you should be when Rebecca said, "Well, you shouldn't be happy today." And she said, "Well, you should be happy every day." And
Mm-hmm.
it's just, for some people, like, that is the thing for them. And yeah, so I thought that was interesting, but I do wanna talk about the Rick Astley song because I think there's a lot more layers there, but I wanna get to that when we get to that part.
Okay. I also thought it was really interesting at the beginning when they were when I think it was the Diamond Dogs were sitting in the locker room with Keeley, and they were all just trying to process death and how they wanted to be reincarnated, right? And Higgins is like, I would love to believe that animals were in charge and us humans are pets. And then Nate's like, I want to be reincarnated as a tiger and then ravage anyone that I hated. I'm like, yikes.
I think a lot of people in the room had that, yikes moment when he said that.
And then Roy's like, it's not that big of a deal, like just very nihilistic about it. And then I loved what Beard said, where he goes, they weighed the body
Mhm.
and it was 21.3 grams lighter, and they believe that's the weight of the soul. And then, of course, Roy then runs in and is like, that means they weighed the body before and after they died, and then just walks away.
He says, clearly whoever figured that out weighed the person, murdered them, and then weighed them again.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then even the team's is like, like you had the captain being like, no trainers, like no Yeezys, like not even the bright red ones. Like I wear trainers all the time. Like it's very difficult. and being like, well, I guess that's the standard. Like we have to change it up to show a certain level of respect.
Yeah, I really loved that with the team because number one, we see Isaac continuing to step into his leadership, right? Letting everyone know we are going as a team. This is what that means. Let me be very clear. It means wearing ties. It means wearing shirts. It means no trainers. And, and I love that everyone's like, okay, and I also love that they all spend so much time in their trainers that they have no clue about what it means to buy dress shoes. And so I thought it's just like it was a really nice moment of levity in comparison to like the heaviness of the topic overall, right?
Right.
But going back to what Beard said, his reference to 21 grams was a tie-in to the movie 21 Grams. Did you ever see it?
Oh, no.
It starred Naomi Watts and Benicio del Toro and Sean Penn. Yeah, and it was all this what it was about was death and the apparent loss of the weight immediately after dying. So
oh, wow.
It was kind of a callback to that, which was interesting. But Roy is so unsentimental and you've got Keely who just wants to like talk about it. She wants to figure it out and she wants to know. I think she's searching for meaning, right?
Yeah.
That her life had some meaning and will, as she says, continue to nourish people along the way. And so I feel like we had a few different storylines going on, right? Like we had these fillers with like Roy and Keely and the team and all that kind of stuff. We had Ted and Sharon, Dr. Sharon, and then we had Rebecca and her mom, which was, I think, a pretty big part of the storyline. And then we had, obviously, like Rebecca and Sam, which we can get to in a little bit. But where do you want to start?
Oh, man, it's tough. You want to start with Rebecca and Sam? Because I feel like that's the start of the episode, actually. They wake up in bed together and they look like they're really enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, they really do. What's weird to me is how much Sam is like dying to go public with this.
Yeah.
Right? Like he doesn't let it go. He just keeps bringing it up.
I don't know if I found it weird because that's just Sam's personality, right? Like Sam does not hold on to secrets. Sam,
yeah, that's true.
Lives his life on his sleeve, he literally was telling all of his teammates about the texting.
Right.
So for him to keep this together is impossible. He probably wants to tell his father. Right. Meanwhile, yeah. Rebecca is the best at keeping secrets. She kept a secret from her mom for like 20, 30 years or however long. Right. So she is comfortable in this setting. So I could see why they were going back and forth between that because it was just drastically different personalities. Not to mention, it's probably much easier for Sam to come out with this than for Rebecca.
Yeah, you're right. And Sam even says it's stressful for him to be hiding this, right? But it just makes me wonder if they're thinking about the longer term, right? And so, like we talked about this, I think.
Right.
I can't remember if it was the last episode or the one before, but she's his boss, like big time.
I know. From an HR perspective, you're like,
yeah. And so for this to get out, I mean, it's going to have some consequences. And so, I guess that was the part. So I understand the part that he's stressed out about it and whatnot, but I feel like he's also smarter than that. And so it was just, I found it interesting that he just kept saying how much he wanted to
But
go
he's
public.
also in love. He's in love.
That's true.
He wants to tell people. He wants to share it with the world.
That's
and
true.
I don't think he is actually and it's kind of maybe even hard for him to think about it because he's also, 23, 25 maybe? Right?
I think he was 21.
Maybe he's 21. My goodness, right? Like, how could you think about the repercussions that Rebecca is going to experience, right? She has to talk to the press about this. She'll have to talk to HR about it. Like, she's going to have to deal with this, He's going to get praised because of, misogynistic press. He's going to be, like, praised for it, and she's going to be ridiculed for it. Like, that's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that comes full circle, right? So Keely and Roy arrive at the church and see Sassy. So first of all, I just want to say everybody needs a friend like Sassy
Mm-hmm.
because first of all, the way she shows up at Rebecca's house,
Oh yeah. So
but
good.
then the way that she deals with Rupert, her whole thing about how she's just like she dreams about him dying every
Oh
day.
man, and she's gonna wear a red dress with joy. Oh my goodness. Like I loved all of that.
Yeah. I loved it too.
And how she calls him out when she's just like, "Oh, you have a daughter now, so all the disrespectful things you've done to women just all of a sudden goes away." I
Mhm.
know one had said that, but that's exactly how it is because he is constantly trying to perform for everyone.
Yeah.
For the first time, I saw how weak he was. I mean, I'd seen how weak he was, but I saw it even in a greater, like, he's really putting a lot of work in to make sure that he is remembered at all times.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so even the way he shows up at, in the receiving line and makes a point of, letting her know that this is my daughter and,
Mm-hmm.
like it's just the whole thing is so gross.
So,
I just want to
so
punch him in the
disgusting.
face.
Right. He like holds it right in front of her and then he's like, "Oh, we got rid of all the TVs so I could just sit and look at them." Yeah, right. You did that, Rupert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah. So love that. Love Sassy. But then Keely shows up and when she and Sassy see each other and like their mutual love for each other, I just thought that was so funny because I mean they met through Rebecca and I mean it's been some time now, but just going back to what we talked about in that episode when they were all in Liverpool and just how there's no jealousy between the
yeah.
two of them, or a vying for attention or anything like that. It's just they love Rebecca. And so by extension, they just love each other. And I really enjoyed that moment because yet again, like that's this episode. I mean, there's so many heavy things, and yet these moments of comedy were just gold in this one, I thought.
Yes. And the best part was right before that, Keely comes up to Rebecca and goes, "I hate that baby. Like
Yeah.
that baby sucks," right? And then she's like, "I will be by your side the entire time." And then she sees Sassy and then she runs away. Like been perfect. Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the reason I brought that up, even though it's kind of out of order, is because they start talking about how it seems like Rebecca's dating someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when they all finally gather in whatever that back room of the church is, and like the truth comes out pretty quick, I thought.
Yeah.
But even there, it's like they're just 100% supportive. Not a single person in that room says,
Yep.
"Is this a good idea?
Yep.
Like, should you be doing like nothing?" Everyone's just like, "That's great." And so it reminded me of the Diamond Dogs and everybody saying, "Well,
Mm.
that's great," to Beard about his relationship with Jane and not really being honest
Oh,
about.
real? Oh, you picked that up? Oh, I didn't pick that up. Oh, I didn't get that sense. I just found it so hilarious that they were having so much fun in the back of the Catholic church
Is it Catholic or Anglican
or
or.
Anglican, yeah, but they had to be told to be quiet 3 separate times, but each time someone came in was like, "Oh, this is where the fun is happening."
Mhm.
Right? And I also love that this fun was happening at a funeral, right? Because I think about
Yeah.
when my dad passed away, like his brothers showed up. They hadn't seen each other in like 20 years, and then all of our family showed up, and it was a lot of joy to be around everybody,
Yeah.
and actually being allowed to have that joy, even though you're being told not to, and you're like, "No, I'm going to feel all the feelings right now." And right now, the feelings are we're talking gossip and we're trying to figure out this really fun thing because Rebecca has never looked so happy, you know?
Mhm.
So I thought people were just really happy for her.
Oh yeah, and I think they were. It just made me remember that about that whole conversation
Mm,
with the Diamond Dogs for some reason. So, but to your point, it's such a contrast to what Keely and Roy were talking about when they were getting ready for the funeral, right? Because Keely says, funerals are like a party, but for sad people, everyone knows they have to go and be sad.
Yeah.
And I agree. Like, again, I think in a lot of cultures, yeah, we feel sad for the loss, but we also celebrate the life that was,
Yep.
you know? But it's hard. Like, I know that's another thing that I realized kind of a few months after my mom died. I went somewhere and I was just having a really good time. And I remember having this moment of like, what are you doing? And I had to talk myself off the ledge
Mm.
to be like, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to laugh and it's okay to have fun. And it doesn't take away anything from her memory
Mm-hmm.
or the fact that she's gone or anything like that. And so I think it's really easy to fall into that place and into that belief like, hey, we just have to be sad because
Right.
this person we loved is gone.
Well, I think it's also this idea of like, well, are there rules? Like, should I be following certain rules? Is there a certain script? Right? Like, are we supposed to walk through the funeral script? And, I just did a workshop on gratitude. And we talked about how you can feel grateful and sad at the same time. You can feel grateful, sad, joy, and confusion all at the same time. You should be allowed to feel all those things. That's what positive psychology talks about all the time. But I think we look to other people and we're like, well, we should be dressed in black and then should be doing this. And then after we do this, then we sing here. And it's just like, who made up all this stuff? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
for anyone that's dealing with death or would be in the future, I would say like feel all the feelings and don't judge yourself however you're showing up because, everyone shows up differently.
Exactly. And I think that's the key point, right? Like grief hits people differently. And I do think like I really feel like gratitude and grief actually go hand in hand
Yeah.
quite a bit. And it's one of those things that when you're in the midst of grief, being able to practice gratitude can help, like it really helps to move you through certain parts of grief sometimes. And it reminds you of some of the good things too. And so I do feel that. And then there's just this element of self-compassion for when we are going through it, because you're right, like it's going to be different for every single person. And when I do my workshops, I always talk about you can't compare your grief
Yeah.
to other people, right? Because otherwise you'll go down this rabbit hole of just feeling like you're not even grieving right. And there's no right way to do that.
Right. And there's also the complexity of how you feel about the person that died, right? Because again, you're like, well, I should be sad that the person died. Well, I don't know how I feel about, everyone has a different experience. Rebecca has a strong feelings towards her dad that is making it really difficult for her to even show up to the funeral, let alone like do a eulogy or anything else about that. So,
Yeah. And I think Rebecca and Ted both, right?
yes.
So they both have really strong feelings about their dads in two very different ways, right? So for Ted, it was his dad dying by suicide. And for Rebecca, it was her dad cheating. And they both use the word hate, though.
Mm-hmm.
They both use the word, or the sign. They both say, like, I hated him for it. And I still hate him for it, which I think is really powerful. And it's interesting. I don't know how you felt about that, how they went back and forth between their stories.
I thought that was like some of the best writing I've seen in the entire show.
Yeah.
Because that's really difficult to do that well.
Yeah.
And again, that's a big risk to try to pull that off, right?
Yeah.
But also I just thought that was just, it was one of the most candid moments you heard of Ted, and it's one of the most candid moments you've heard of Rebecca.
Mm.
And they're both processing with people that frankly, it's really hard for both of them to share with at first. And both of them both those people, Rebecca's mom and, Dr. Sharon, gave them the space.
Yeah, they really did. So let's talk about Ted and Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
So we start out, like you said, Ted's getting ready, to his favorite song to get ready to. And we cut to him getting ready to put his tie on. And now he's back into panic attack mode. And this time he recognizes it. He realizes it right away and is able to obviously call Dr. Sharon. So yeah, so this time he's able to call Dr. Sharon, and what I loved is her phone still says Ted Lasso, but or Coach Lasso, but she actually answered it saying, "Hello, Ted." And
Mm.
so you can see that even their relationship has started to change a little bit, which I thought was a really nice little
Mm.
kind of clue there. And she tells him to focus on his 478 breathing and that she's on her way. And so, are you familiar with 478?
No.
So, in the workshops that I do around trauma, this is one of the things that we talk about is using the breath to downregulate when we are in a place of trauma or crisis. So, what a lot of people don't know is there's something called box breathing. And so, box breathing is actually a tactical breathing exercise that is used by law enforcement, it's used by the Navy SEALs, and it's a way to regulate your nervous system in real time. And so, when we see that someone's having a panic attack or their nervous system is just dysregulating. So when we see that they're having a panic attack or their nervous system is kind of going off the rails and dysregulating, we want to get them kind of out of their heads and into their bodies. And so there's a couple of things people do. You know, one of them is just like having them focus on their senses. But the other thing is using the breath. And the reason that the breath is important is because the breath is tied directly to the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve is kind of what I like to call the toggle switch between the two parts of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. And so the breath kind of switches that vagus nerve on and allows us to move from fight or flight, which is where we are when we're in that panic attack or in that anxiety, into rest and digest. And so that's the place where we can actually catch our breath again and get to that point of being regulated again. And so the 478, it actually is a breathing technique that came out of traditional yogic breathing. But the idea is that like we take the shorter in breath, like so the in breath corresponds with our fight or flight response, and the out breath corresponds with our rest and digest response. And so, if we take a shorter in breath and a longer out breath, we're actually helping to stabilize the nervous system by engaging that parasympathetic side. And so, that's why you have like the short 4 count in, and then you've got the 7 count hold, but then you've got the double, like double the time 8 count on the out breath is to get the breath back. And so, I mean, to get the nervous system back. So it's pretty common. So anyone who has regular anxiety or experiences panic attacks is probably familiar with 478.
Mm.
Also, people who have a hard time falling asleep, a lot of times 478 is recommended.
Mm.
But I love that they just talked about it. And that's the thing, like, I feel like they don't dumb things down in this show,
Yep.
right? Like, it's not
Yep.
like she said 478 and then like goes on to explain it somehow. Like, they
Yep.
assume that the audience is smart enough to figure it out or look it up or whatever.
Yep.
And so I really appreciate that. And so she arrives walking her bike to his house and goes in, and we see it's just a mess. And we were kind of talking about this a couple weeks ago, or a couple of episodes ago. At least I felt like Ted was starting to unravel, and
Mm.
I feel like we see his space now, and like it's more apparent than ever
Mm-hmm.
that he's kind of gone in that direction.
Yeah. Nothing to say about that. I'm just, yeah, it's tough. It was just tough seeing him in that space. But I thought it was interesting when she was like, what she's like, can I sit down? And he said something. What did he say? But he was just like something to the back of like, I would really like that almost.
I wish the doctor would, or something like
I
that.
wish the doctor would. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the past, you would think he used to run away. Like he literally ran out of her office. And now he's allowing her in his space and is asking her to sit down. So I was like, there's a lot has changed.
Yeah. I also love that she hates tea, just like he does.
I know. And then he wants to reveal everything to her when she says he thinks it tastes like, what did she call it? Like
Wet paper.
wet paper
Oh,
bag. And then he's
yeah.
like, I'll tell you anything. So
Yeah. So in this space, we find out that Ted, so not only did his father die by suicide, but Ted actually was the one who found him.
yeah.
And actually heard the gunshot that led to it. And so when you think about that trauma, like that's especially for a young teenager, you know?
Well, he found him and then he had to tell his mom.
Mhm.
And even how the way he describes this is like, I had to tell her to come home, you
Mhm.
know? And I thought it was really interesting how he even described it. It's just like, well, I hate him because like he quit.
Yeah.
He quit on himself, he quit on his family. And that makes so much more sense now why Ted won't quit on others
Mhm.
and why he didn't want to quit on his relationship with his ex-wife,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's deep. That's
Yeah.
deep and
Yeah.
tough.
It's like a full circle moment, right? Like all those little pieces that had kind of been left hanging along the way, it's like they all kind of came together now and we understand why he feels this way about quitting anything.
Mhm.
But it also we see why he kind of speaks the way he does and behaves the way that he does is because he says that in that moment I decided I was never going to let another person pass me by who might be hurting on the inside, right?
Right. Right.
And so you think about his main phrase, "I appreciate you," right?
Right.
He says that to everybody. He doesn't say, "I appreciate it" when they do something for him. He says, "I
Uh-huh.
appreciate you." And he is struggling with so much guilt because he feels like he didn't let his father know that he appreciated him and that maybe if he
Mm.
would've, things would have been different, right?
Mhm.
And so now we have that understanding of like, oh, okay, so this is why he's so adamant about working with Jamie and bringing him back and
Yep.
mentoring him
Yep.
and, mentoring Sam and making sure that he becomes a leader and, getting Isaac out of his head and like back to playing the game, like
Or bringing Roy back to the team, right?
exactly,
And
exactly.
what's also interesting is I think of the believe sign, which I have hanging over my door, right? The believe
Hmm.
sign is also this form of like most people will quit, right? But I think of speeches he's given in the past, but it's like, no, this is when you double down on believing when no one else believes in you. I believe in you, right? And I
Hmm.
believe in us. And yeah, that's how he doesn't want to. I guess he just doesn't want to recreate the experience that he experienced with his father.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, right? But he also wants to just make sure that he's going to do everything he can in his power to make every person he comes across know that they matter. And that's huge, you
Yeah,
know?
I think what's interesting what Dr. Sharon says, and then she goes, "I'm sorry that happened to you, Ted." And he's like, "Yeah, he took a lot away from me and my mom, right?" And then she asks, "What did you love about him?"
Mm,
And that just shook him because at first he couldn't even figure it out. And he was just like, he was a good man, a real chatterbox, could be a better listener box, a listening box. And you could see, like, oh my goodness, there's parts of him that's there. And then he tells that story about Johnny Tremaine and the homework, that he was freaked out about and he never, and talk about panic attack, right? Like not doing your homework and then waiting a whole month and then the test is the next day. And then his dad is like, you're okay. Go to bed, think about something you look forward to, and we'll talk tomorrow. And then memorizes the whole book, reads the whole book, memorizes it, and then comes out and drives him to school and tells it as a bedtime story and then he gets an A. Like, wow. Like that's Ted in a nutshell right there. Like that's Ted level love.
yeah. Yeah. And it was an interesting thing that Dr. Sharon did, right? Because he initially, when she asks him that question, he's like, why?
Yeah.
And she explains, like, "You've told me what you hate about him. Now I'd like to know what you love about him." And just, bringing it back to that complexity that exists in relationships. It's never just this black and white thing where it's all or nothing. Like,
Yep.
I mean, I know there's exceptions, right? Like if there's been major trauma or violence or things
Mm-hmm.
like that. But even in that, so, for me, when in writing my book, one of the things that I really realized was I knew that I had a complex relationship with my own dad for a variety of reasons. And it was only through writing it that I realized like the moments at which I finally was able to, to forgive and to find some compassion and things like that. But like you have to be reminded of the good things. And for such a long time, I just was holding on to all the things that hurt. Right. And there was so much goodness too, though. And
Mm-hmm.
so I love that she brings that back and reminds him or gives him that opportunity to remember something and he's happy about that, right? And that's like but that's when he also has his realization that he doesn't ever want to let anyone else go by who might be hurting because life is just really really hard.
Right.
And so it was such a incredible performance too, just
Yeah.
from Jason Sudeikis and even Dr. Sharon was amazing, but, like, his ability to just go there and really break like, you feel what he's feeling in that moment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
And
so
that he even says at one point, he's like, "Is it illegal? Can I have a hug?" And then I love that even in that moment, right? Again, levity. He's like, "Are you going to charge me for this session?" And she's like, "Yes, this is an at-home call." And he's like, "I appreciate your integrity." Like, I just love that whole dynamic that,
Yeah,
again, reiterates earlier what, like, yes, this is a professional relationship, and also I really care.
exactly, exactly. And so then mirroring what Ted's kind of going through is Rebecca, right? So she's in the church with her mom.
Mm, 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 mm.
I mean, the way that they did that story, it makes it seem like it happened on the same day for both of them,
Mm.
which could be interesting. But yeah, so Rebecca is angry. She hates her father. She caught him cheating. And the worst part was that the next day he acted like nothing had happened and they just went on with their lives. Right. And that's like the worst thing to her. So she doesn't want to give a eulogy. It's also kind of weird that she wouldn't have known before now that she was giving a eulogy. But
Right. But who knows, right? Like, it happened on Friday the 13th. She's trying to get into the wine and drink cabinet with Sassy, who I guess is named Florence. I didn't even know her name is Florence, right?
yeah, because she introduces her as Flo. And like,
Right. I think what was so powerful, she goes, "I'm just so sick of keeping secrets."
mhm,
And I think when I see Rebecca, I feel like Rebecca is always holding back what she wants to say,
yeah,
and she probably had to keep secrets when she was with Rupert, I'm sure he cheated on her as well. And she probably hated herself for having to do that. The fact that she held the burden of keeping the secret from her mom for so long, every time her mom like left him and then knew that he was going to walk away, and like who knows what other secrets Rebecca has, but it's just been eating away at her for so long. And I feel like what is refreshing about Sam is he has no secrets, he has no burdens, like he's so light and airy, and like he's just like living his life.
yeah,
And it's such a huge contrast for her where she is constantly buttoned up, right?
yeah, yeah,
And she's so buttoned up, especially when she's around press, that it's rare that she can ever even express joyful emotion. And I think of the first time Rebecca expressed joyful emotion that I remember is when Ted beats Rupert in that dart contest.
hmm,
That was the first time I saw where she actually like allowed herself to be seen in a bigger public setting,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, and not
Um,
just like buttoned up,
yeah.
serious.
And that must be exhausting and so stressful for her.
Totally. Yeah, and so, she thinks that she's revealing the secret, but her mom already knew. So her mom's been keeping secrets too, right? So her
Mm-hmm.
mom's known this whole time. It did make me curious about if Rebecca thinks her mom didn't know, then what did she think her mom leaving her dad was about all these times? You know what I mean? Like clearly they never
Mm.
really talked about that
Mm-hmm.
because this is like the point at which they both realized that they each knew that he was cheating. And so I thought that that was kind of interesting, but, uh, the other thing that really came up for me in this part was how our parents do so much to try to make it so that our lives are just a little bit better than theirs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Rebecca's so angry at her mom for not leaving, especially when she finds out that she knew, and she says, "Well, then I hate you too." And that was just heartbreaking because she doesn't
Yeah.
say at any
Yeah.
point, she doesn't say, "I didn't really mean that," or I mean, she just says it. And but her mom says, "I was so proud of you for walking away. Like, I didn't have the courage and the strength to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
I was so proud of you when you did it." And it reminded me that when I finally left my marriage, which was not a good place for me to be, it was really hard, and it was right after my dad had passed away. And I remember every single one of my aunts, so my mom's sisters, calling me one after another to tell me like how proud they were of me for standing up for myself and for doing what I needed to take care of myself. And and I just thought like, and they've everyone's had issues along the way and things like that, but like I think are on the one hand, it's like our parents shape our perceptions quite a bit. And we carry a lot of that baggage with us. But on the other hand, we also have more opportunity in a lot of ways
Mm-hmm.
to do something different and better that is going to serve us.
And I think of also the benefit of her mom staying. Maybe her mom thought she needed to stay with him because, financially, maybe she was just like, and thinking about Rebecca, and what her life was going to look like, especially during that time. And it was interesting what her mom said when her mom said, "I'm actually glad to hear you hate me because all these years I thought,
Yeah.
you didn't think of me, right? And I'll take your anger over your indifference, any day." And I was like, wow, like,
Yeah.
yes, like she's been holding on to that for so long. You could tell the mom's that weight off her mom's shoulders.
Yeah. And I think that goes right back to this whole theme of you matter, right? Because
Yep.
indifference is the worst. Like if you've ever gotten the silent treatment from someone, like
Yep.
there is nothing worse than that.
Yep.
Because at least if they're engaging, like, that there's enough there to like where they care enough to engage. And so to have nothing just leaves you with that feeling like you don't even matter. And so I think that that was like a big thing for her mom.
And what's interesting, and this is near the end of the episode, but I love what her mom said about, "Oh, that's how I handle Rupert."
Yeah.
Like she's kind of indifferent and just like polite, and they're polite at the end, and it's so disarming
Yeah.
for Rupert. He doesn't know how to handle it because he wants to
Yes.
goad them more, and it's like, "Come on over, you can hang
Yeah.
out with us." And he's like, "No, I want you to be angry at me, and instead, like, you don't care about me, and I've done this performative action just to get back at you, and now it's not working. I
Yeah.
have no power anymore." And then he just gives up all of his shares. That's crazy because he's like, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter to him. He can't hurt her that way. And it's like, wow, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And the caliber of acting on this show, like Rupert in that moment, there's just the slightest like look of shock,
Mm-hmm.
before he recovers. And the same thing with Rebecca when she and Sam are in the closet and he just hugs her. And she initially like sinks into it and you see that feeling of like relief on her face.
Yeah.
And then you just see that slight shift, right? Where
The pat on the back. She was about to give him the pat.
yeah, but in her face also just her facial expression
Yeah.
shifts just a little bit to where like she's like, "Okay, I have to like stop this?"
Yeah.
And so it's really phenomenal acting. So let's talk about the eulogy because that was so interesting. So, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, you know me. I love it. I love it because, first off, I'm thinking she feels like she has to be perfect up there, right? She has to go up there and then she has to like brag about how amazing her dad is because that's what one does at a eulogy. But then instead, in the saddest, most grief-filled moment, probably, she potentially has ever experienced publicly, she just starts playing. She literally just starts playing. She starts singing this song, and not in a strong way either, by the way, just like in the very, like, almost like a kid, almost like singing like when she was a kid. And who joins her in the play? But the guy that comes in late, because the whole time I was like, oh, I hope Ted makes it to the funeral. And I knew it. I knew that he would get her back. And when he starts singing, and then everyone starts singing, talk about attunement, right? And talk about expressing how sad you are through song. I mean, why are songs written? Songs are written many times because you can't express it in another way. And everyone mourns together in the singing. And I was like, this is such a playful, joyful, sad, grieving moment. And it's just beautiful and it's perfect. It's perfect in its messiness. It's perfect in its complexity. It's perfect in its playfulness.
Yeah.
By not trying to be perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this particular part was so layered. Yeah, I agree with you that she is up there. She's at a loss for words. But this song, Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. Oh my gosh, it brings back such memories. But it's interesting, that they selected that song. And as we know, Ted Lasso does not do anything by coincidence or accident. So this whole thing of her getting up to do the eulogy. So the whole all the Ted Lasso groups are filled with people talking about Rick rolling. Have you heard about
Yep.
this term?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So for people don't know, Rick rolling was like something that happened in the mid 2000s.
Yeah. And it's just been happening forever. It still goes on. Yeah.
Yeah. So originally it was this thing where you'd click on a link on the internet and thinking you're going to like one thing, and then it would take you to the Rick Astley video. So that was called You've Been Rickrolled. And so what was interesting is Rickrolling is defined in dictionary.com, which I was like, oh, that's interesting. But it's defined as a bait and switch prank where someone posts a link that seems relevant to whatever discussion they're having, but then the link redirects to Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up. And so I was thinking about like, well, what's the bait and switch here? Right. And I think there's a couple of things. So first, she's getting up to do a eulogy. And instead of a eulogy, the song comes out, right? So that's like, I think the kind of surface level bait and switch. But then like, I couldn't stop thinking about that this morning. And like as I was getting ready. And the other thing that came to me was that, she had just before they came out there finished telling her mom how much, like she hated her father and that she hated her mother. So for me, the other bait and switch was on herself, where like she thought she was getting up. She didn't really have anything good to say. And then she's singing the lyrics to this song that are all about being there for people and loving them. And, and so again, going back to that complexity of relationships, and it's not just pure hate or whatever, and so I don't know, that's what came up for me. And the other part about that was like, I feel like for many of us, we have these moments in life. We have a moment in life when we realize that our parents aren't perfect. And so I don't know, like we go through a good chunk of our childhood usually thinking our parents can do no wrong in a way. And then we have this moment where we realize like, oh, they're not perfect. I think more often than not, we tend to judge them for that instead of recognizing, like, instead of seeing their humanity and being able to say, oh, they're not perfect, they're human. And I think we forget that, right? Because parents are often put on these pedestals in our minds. And so I was just thinking about that this morning that, like, imagine if when we think about the complexity in those relationships and we think back on, this process of like forgiving and whatever, if we could start to see the humanity in the people around us, and then find a way to let them know they matter. And so to me, like this was Rebecca's way of letting her mom know, like, I do love you and you do matter. And so, yeah, I don't know. There was a lot that kind of came up for me around this, especially because I just kept thinking like that definition of Rickrolling is bait and switch. And so like there has to be more here that they're trying to put forward.
I felt differently because I was just thinking like, this is the first time it's not Rick rolling. That they're actually singing the song. And I've never really listened to the lyrics of the song. So I was just writing them down as they kept singing them. And I was like, never gonna give you up, never gonna desert you, never gonna make you cry, never gonna say goodbye, never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. And it's just like, that's impossible. Everyone does all those things, right? Those are like, no one is perfect, right? And maybe that's maybe part of the point, right? That this person is trying to promise all these things that they just can't deliver on, but you want to be able to deliver on, right? You want to be able to. And I think that's the whole idea of the play is the opposite of perfection, and really enjoying or appreciating the imperfections of people.
Yeah.
And when you can actually appreciate the imperfections of people, that's how you actually build real relationship. That's how I feel that was a really powerful moment with her mom and her, because it went from she being like, turn off that song, and her mom being like, okay, sausage, like even calling her sausage. So that's what she called her. And she's sleeping in her kid's room that looks exactly like probably it did, 40 years ago. To then singing it publicly when she's like, I hate this song, but I still love you, right? And I just that moment was just so beautiful. Having said that, just a side note, Beard with the iPhone, what?
Yeah.
with the iPhone and his girlfriend there singing Catholic Mass, wasn't there later. Like, had to go later, but like during that time was weird. And also the breastfeeding during the funeral, and what do you call it, couldn't handle it. Like one of the soccer players was just like, huh, what's happening? He's like, didn't, like, just these, I love these just random moments that happen in these really tough scenes where, it's surreal. There's a lot of surrealness that happens around death and funerals, and they, I believe, captured that quite well.
Yeah. The other thing that just came up as you were talking was also when you're in the midst of grief, or regardless of how complicated it is, it can also feel kind of isolating sometimes. It doesn't feel like people understand what you're going through. And it was just such a nice demonstration of how much they all love her, right? The fact that the whole team showed up.
Yeah.
And none of them were trainers. And they all stayed, through the reception, and they all sang to her, like with her. I was reading this article yesterday that I think this scene was written a little bit different. And Hannah Waddingham, went to Jason Sudeikis and said, like, this doesn't work. It has to be different. And she has to be singing it in this like disjointed way. And Ted has to be the one to jump in to like help her. And so they redid it in that way. It wasn't originally scripted that way. And so I thought that was really interesting because it's so powerful the way that it all played out.
It's so powerful because we know she's a good singer. We know she's an amazing singer. Like the last time we saw her sing, it was like absolutely amazing. So for her to be singing it almost like she's a kid again, is really fascinating and powerful. I think the other part that you brought up that's really important, especially when you're dealing with death, is like, I remember when my dad passed away, there weren't a lot of people I could talk to about it that had also experienced death. I remember reaching out to my friend Lauren, who had experienced death, and that was the only person I could talk to about it, because everyone else, when they would call me up to apologize or contact me, they wanted to process at that moment. And I was like, I'm trying to set up a funeral and contact people and just let you know. And like, you want to process at this time. And it's tough. It's really tough. That's why I really also found the scene so magical, where they are all laughing in the back and they have to be told over and over again to be quiet, because like, they're just showing up however they want to show up, right? And this priest is like, this is what you need to do. You need to do it this way. And it's like, no, we're going to talk gossip. I'm going to bring wine in here. We're going to go through all the emotions. And I thought that's liberating. And I feel like that needs to be, that people can do such a service to someone going through grief by allowing that person to show up however they want to show up.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I want to talk real quickly in these last couple minutes about Nate.
Is his hair getting gray? I don't understand. What's going on with that? Like, it got grayer in one episode. I don't understand. Like, explain that to me.
I mean, it's progressively been getting grayer.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll see it continue to do so. We can definitely talk about that next time because it's a lot more noticeable. But yes, it is. You are correct. It has been getting grayer.
Okay. I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was going crazy for a bit. I thought I was losing it.
You know, going back to this like awkwardness of what to say to people, you know, you've got like his initial, you know, when everyone's telling Rebecca, so sorry for your loss or whatever, he's just like tries to come up with some witty, you know, and then fails.
Trying to be perfect, right? Trying to be perfect.
Exactly. And kind of gets humiliated and like walks away, right? And then it happens a second time inside the church, right? With the suit. And Jan Moss, good Lord, like that man.
Dude.
even Jamie, who is like so clueless sometimes, is like,
and so lethal himself, was like, oh, dude, yeah. What did he say? Because what he said was like rough.
Yeah, he said, oh, another man buying your clothes, it's infantilizing, no?
And then Nate tried to defend it. He's just like, no, Ted doesn't buy all my clothes. My mom also buys me clothes.
And then he realizes, right? He realizes and he's like, and so again, he walks away. Like, yeah. And so, yeah, so we get just those little like glimpses of, oh yeah, he's struggling. And then when Rupert leaves though, he whispers to him and you see like, Nate kind of look kind of intrigued, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of speculation when the show originally aired about what was going to happen. So we won't get into it this week because I know you haven't watched it yet.
I have not watched it. I don't know. All I know is that whenever I go to Twitter to post stuff or something like that, there is a lot of animosity towards this guy. So I don't know what it is, but I know it's something. It's been like hovering over. And it's kind of making me very nervous.
Yeah, it's coming. And then one line we didn't talk about, but I just want to mention because it's so funny, is when Roy and Keely are talking and she, you know, says, well, what would you want me to do if you got hit by a bus?
Oh, yeah.
And he says, avenge me, Keely. And I just
avenge me. And she wants to get buried in like a tree. That's how I want to do it too. So I was like, oh my gosh, I love that. Is that how you want to get buried too? Under a tree, like as part of the soil so that you become a tree with fruit?
I don't know about that.
She's like, I don't know about that. That's
I mean, the cremation part, yes, but I don't think I want to go in the ground that way. But we forgot. Well, so the other funny thing was Danny in his shoes, right? And the whole thing with
yes, right.
And Jamie's response about how these shoes were not made for us. They're made for muggles. That was really funny.
Well, I mean, while we're talking about great lines, like remember when what is it? Well, Sam first hugs Rebecca. He doesn't kiss her. I thought he was going to kiss her in the closet, but instead he gives her a hug, and then she says, you are so kind, loving, and wise, but, and he goes, I hate big butts and I cannot lie. And I'm like, that was a great lie. That was great.
I don't know. It felt weird coming from him. Like, I feel like that's like something Ted would say, but maybe Ted's rubbing off on people.
Maybe Ted's rubbing off of him. Maybe not like, I mean, you know, and he's a bit cocky too, because even at the end, he's like, you know, while you, you know, he's like, I'll give you as much time as you need, but just let you know, I'm only going to get more wonderful. Like, I'm like, this dude he's sassy. He's cocky. He's confident. I'm like, he has a swag to him.
Yeah. But I love that Jamie and Danny are now friends, and that's really lovely to see. But the thing we forgot was Jamie telling Keely he loves her.
Both of
So
them
right, so
right after each
right,
other,
yeah.
like,
So
yo.
Roy comes, but you would think Roy would have seen him talking to Keely, but we see so much growth from Jamie, and it's like there's this part, there's just this, and you see the growth in that he recognizes. He even says, "I know that you're with Roy. I know you care about him. I know you're happy,
Mhm.
but I would, kick myself if I didn't say this to you now." And it's just like, oh my goodness. Like, you know, I was
Well,
not
I thought
expecting that.
that was the first time I actually liked him.
Yeah.
That was the first time, like, he was, like, pure, authentic, like, not doesn't have, like, some attitude behind it, and it was so fascinating that he goes, "I love you, Keely," and then he goes, "I'm sorry." And then Roy swoops in right after,
Mhm.
shares vulnerably as well, and basically saying that he's been making stupid jokes the whole time. And that's because, like, when his grandpa died, he wanted to talk to him and he wanted him to show up like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then he didn't show up, and it made me realize I only got this one life. And then he goes, "I love you, Keely. I'm sorry too." And you're like, so she's just getting bombarded with love right now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, I'd be confused, but I'm like, yikes, this is, I did not expect this love triangle to come back. I thought it was already done.
Well, and that feeling of just wanting one more, right? Like one more conversation, one more
Mm.
meal, one more hug,
Hmm.
one more whatever. Like it's so relatable,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
when especially when it's unexpected, but like even if it's not, that part felt so relatable to me. But yeah, so we close out this episode with the song. It's I Remember by Molly Drake. And I was listening to the lyrics and it's a song about remembering like a particular memory, and kind of the main lines that keep getting repeated are, "I remember firelight and you remember smoke." And it made me think about how just like with grief, like you can have multiple people experiencing this like in the midst of the same experience, and they all see it differently,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
experience it differently. And so I thought once again just a really beautiful way to bring it all together.
One thing that confused me, and I need your thoughts on this, is what did you think of the ending where they like popped in the summer of 79 video and they're just sitting there on the bed talking, and then Rick Roll plays over it. What did you think of that? As I didn't know how I didn't it was just a weird ending for me that I was like, huh, you know?
Yeah. I didn't really understand it either, in terms of, like, who would have recorded that. So I was looking, and there was a lot of discussion from people that the fact that it was taped onto the end of, like, her childhood videos would show something about, like, how much both her parents love the song, and I don't really understand how people got to that, but so yeah, I didn't really get it either, except to say that it was obviously a very important song in their family
Yeah.
because her mom plays it every day. It shows up on this video.
And you get Rick rolled at the end again. Like, maybe
Yeah.
that's the joke. Maybe the joke is that. Like, you get Rick rolled, you get to see her for a moment in the bowl, and then that's it.
Oh, you know what? You're right. I hadn't even thought about that, but that's right. That's exactly the definition, right? Is
Hmm.
like they're thinking it's going to be a video of her, and then it goes into the video of the song. So
Maybe.
yeah, you're right.
I don't know.
She got rickrolled. So yeah, so I think we covered everything. I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Oh,
we were
there
all
is
over the place today, but I think we got just about everything. And so,
such a good episode.
yeah,
So well written. Oh.
yeah, definitely one of my favorites for a variety of reasons. But all right, so any takeaways from today?
Oh. I think the main one, which we've expressed numerous times, is this idea of allowing people to be however they want to be, how to show up however they want to show up, especially when they're going through tough times, especially death, And again, it goes back partly to Twitch of like, was he and other people allowed to be different parts of themselves? And the more we can allow people to be their complex self. You know, we talk about authentic self. You're allowed to show up as your authentic self. That cliche. What does that actually mean? That means that they can show up however they want to without judgment. That's a world I want to live in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me is just remembering as often as possible to let people know they matter. So that's definitely what I'm
That's
taking
great.
away. So anyway, well, thank you everyone for listening. And we only have 2 episodes left for
Oh
this
my
season.
goodness.
And we are recording when we just found out that they said season 3 is coming spring of 2023. So uh, definitely looking forward to what that means and when we'll actually see an episode. But I'm definitely curious to see where this goes. So yeah,
Yeah.
excited to finish up these last 2.
I appreciate you. You definitely matter. You've impacted my life in many ways, Dimple, and for everyone listening as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you too. And
We appreciate you. You all matter. Thank you.
yes, so take care, everyone, and we will see you next time.
See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Instagram or on our website, wwtldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other Ted heads took away from the episode or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Every rating helps us get our show in front of more listeners. To that end, we'd also ask if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, loved ones, randos on the street. You get it.
Thank you to the team at Podify for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for all our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch, or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?